started this, and I'll try and get you out of here at 1:45. And I'm just going to respond to your Douglas essays. I'll try and respond and maybe do some type of digital conversation with you when I get to those. Okay. Got a lot of grading to do today, so I may not even get to them yet tonight, but I'll get to them. Okay, so the title of this is Manifest Destiny and Its Legacy. Let's start with the first origin of manifest destiny. Okay, so where did this term come from? It comes, it seemed to be created, this term manifest destiny, and I'm assuming you have some familiarity with this, but I'll explain it in a moment. It seemed to be created in 1845, okay, by a man by the name of John L. O'Sullivan. And here's the famous manifest destiny quote, if you will. Our manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent, which Providence has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty and federative self-government entrusted to us. Now, this is once again the first known use of the term. John L. O'Sullivan was an American columnist and editor, so he's published in newspapers and things like that, right? Now that word providence, right? That word providence means God, right? So manifest destiny, right? It's our God-given destiny to explore this entire continent, right? And spread our great experiment of liberty, right? So it's manifest, meaning it's inherent, it's designated by God, okay? So this was a belief that came about as we continue to expand across the continent. Now, of course, there are peoples there who would disagree with us, right? But this is a manifest destiny came to be a key belief of the time period, okay? So some explanation as to what I just rambled on about here. The manifest destiny is the nation's obvious. To be manifest is to be obvious. So if something is manifest, it's present. It's not a mystery, right? So the nation's obvious destiny was that it expand from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. And once again, a God-given destiny, once again, providence. Many Americans believe the United States was special because of its democracy. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing to think you're special because you have a democracy, but we've tended to believe in this notion of American exceptionalism, that our democracy was exceptional, right, in its values, those values as stated in Declaration of Independence and those rights that are protected in the Bill of Rights. In some respects, though, this was a chance for land greed, right, and ideals to meet. So Expansion West kind of combines all those things. Empire and liberty were going to be conveniently conjoined here, right? So there's a desire to have an empire and have access to all these resources and be a great power, but also to spread liberty. So we're combining these things, right? You know, we're combining land, we're combining greed, we're combining resources, but we're also combining ideals, right? Freedom and liberty, as we take land from others here. So there's some, obviously these issues can be discussed and debated, and there will be people who criticize it, as you see some of that down here, right? Once again, very popular belief. American democracy, the belief was that American democracy was empowering, and that it was empowering to its peoples, okay? And that, of course, the U.S. should spread it because it is empowering, right? That these virtues should be spread to new areas, right? The United States never says it's being imperialistic. The United States always says it's spreading democracy, okay? Now, of course, there'll be some criticisms of this, as I mentioned, as you see in this fourth bullet here. Criticisms of American democracy did occur. Basically, critics argued that the U.S. wasn't as democratic as it professed to be, right? And of course, there's some evidence to that. There were rights denied blacks. We had the largest slave system on the planet at the time. Women were not given full equality, right? Couldn't even vote in most cases. There were some states probably, well, I'd have to look into that. There might have been some states by 1845 that were letting women vote in some areas, but I didn't review that for this lecture. But And of course, Native Americans in the process of this expansion were being removed from their land. Okay, so there are definitely some limits to this ideal democracy that Americans say is empowering to people, right? And what people is it empowering to, critics would say, right? And there were critics in this time period, of course. You know, we're kind of getting some of those pro-imperialism versus anti-imperialism debates already happening, okay, in this time period as we expand west. Okay. Okay, now I need to mention the presidential election in 1844 here, okay? Believe it or not, this is all building up to the Civil War. This is all part of the Civil War unit, even though we haven't even really gotten to the Civil War yet. Presidential election of 1844 and the impact that Manifest Destiny had upon it. In order to do that, we need to mention James Polk, right? Who's from Tennessee. And James Polk will take over after John Tyler, okay? And he'll defeat Henry Clay in the election of 1844. Clay will be defeated for the third time. Let's see here, a little bit more background here. So John Tyler had taken over for William Henry Harrison, who died after only a month in office. William Henry Harrison in 1841. But by 1844, the Whig Party had abandoned John Tyler and nominated Henry Clay instead. Okay, so a little bit of background there, I guess. I don't know if that's important in this particular case, but sometimes it's nice to know the story, fill in the blanks. Okay, now Polk is all about Manifest Destiny. He is going to promise in campaign speeches to acquire Oregon, Texas, and California. He's going to promise to do those things. He's also going to promise to retire after one term as president. Okay, so let's see, I think I have a slide on the election next before I say more. I do, okay, good. So presidential election 1844, once again, Manifest Destiny. Polk is a Democrat. Henry Clay is the Whig. Now, Henry Clay is a significant figure in United States history, and he's going to come up more in the next week or so as we get into the coming of the Civil War. He's going to be a key compromiser. He's actually recently voted in a historical poll the most significant congressman in United States history, even though maybe you've never heard of him because he's a little bit farther back. But he'll be a longtime senator and representative from Kentucky. He'll also run for president 3 times, but he'll be one of the biggest presidential losers in United States history, and that he doesn't win each time. Now, this election will be very close, at least in the popular vote. I don't know if you can see this over here, guys, but the popular vote is very close, right? It's like 50% to 48%, a little bit blurry there. Now, of course, that doesn't often translate into a close electoral college victory. The electoral college vote will be 62 to 38 there. Okay, 170 to like 105. But it's nevertheless a very close election according to the popular vote. And probably what cost Clay his election was underestimating the popularity of Manifest Destiny. And the vast majority of Americans were supporting expansion west. Okay, think about connecting expansion to economic success. That's kind of a common belief in the United States. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's look at Texas first. So I think I mentioned, if I go back a slide here, right? So Polk's going to want, I'm going to get these, gosh dang it, we're going to get to that gosh dang Pacific Ocean. We're going to get Oregon, Texas, and California, right? Let's look at Texas first, okay? After Polk's election, but before his inauguration, remember, there's a time period from election to inauguration. We're dealing with that right now. Biden won't take office till January 20th. In these years, it wasn't until March 20th or sometime in March. I think it was the 20th, okay? But after Polk's election, but before his inauguration, Texas actually entered the Union in 1845. And John Tyler, who was abandoned by the Whig Party, he wasn't even nominated in 1844 to run again after once again taking over for William Henry Harrison, who passed away after only a month, okay? He's actually going to approve the bill to annex Texas 3 days before leaving office. So Polk comes into office, I guess already keeping one promise, even though maybe it was more John Tyler. This banner is from Polk's campaign in 1844, right? This is in a frame in some museum somewhere. But if you notice, you've got 25 stars here. There's Polk in the middle. And there's 25 stars. And this outside star is Texas. So Polk was, he's wide out in the open about taking Texas, right? Okay, now Texas at this point, and unfortunately we kind of skipped over this, right, due to the pandemic and me maybe not moving as fast as I should have had you guys move. But Texas had declared its independence from Mexico in 1836. Maybe you remember Sam Houston. You probably remember the Alamo. Sam Houston revenges the Alamo when he led the Texans to victory at San Jacinto against Santa Anna. Okay, and so Texas declares its independence after that battle. Okay, so Polk's coming into office. Hey, Texas is coming in. Thanks, John. Right? But Polk once again did not just talk about manifest destiny. He will put it into action. Okay, and that allows me to transition to Oregon here. Okay, and this history can be, maybe you don't know this history. It's going to be a little bit of history. How did we get these states that we have now, right? So what about Oregon? A little bit of background here. Oregon country here. You can see this is Oregon country, right? In here, okay. It's jointly occupied by the U.S. and Great Britain since 1819. Okay, maybe part of the settlement coming out of the War of 1812. Okay, so Oregon is jointly occupied. So in other words, there's British settlers there, there's U.S. settlers there. They're just kind of agreeing to, yeah, this is kind of both of ours right now. Now, Americans will outnumber the British. Eventually, there are going to be a lot more Americans in this territory, particularly down here, right, than British. Okay, and what's happening is you have Christian missionaries settling there. But also Oregon fever, maybe you've heard that before, maybe that was a phrase that popped up in junior high, okay? But also Oregon fever had gripped American settlers, and many of them have taken the Oregon Trail west seeking opportunity. Most Americans settled in the Willamette River Valley, okay? The Willamette River Valley is right down here. You can see the Oregon Trail, right, guys? Okay, and then you see the Willamette River Valley down here, which is very beautiful, very fertile. I've probably said it to you before, kids. I'll say it again. If you get a chance to go out west and visit that area sometime in your life, please do so. I think every part of the country is beautiful. We're very blessed with the land that we have in this country, but the West is just incredible. And the mountains and the beauty out there. And Oregon's a big part of that. And this region here was just beautiful and fertile and easily attracted people seeking opportunity. Now, Polk has a campaign slogan, 54-40 or fight. Right, interesting slogan. We've had 2 wars with the British, which we did manage to win. Okay, American Revolution, War of 1812. Sometimes War of 1812 is thought of as a draw, but I think you could say we definitely solidified ourselves as a nation coming out of it. And Polk is saying, "Up, I'm one all the way up to here, 54-40 or fight." So what the heck is he talking about? Another war with England over this expansive territory here? Okay. But privately, he wasn't talking so forcibly, right? Privately, Polk agreed to compromise with the British. And what we see happen is the Oregon Treaty of 1846. And let's see, what does that do? That does what you saw on the map there. I'll just give you a moment here. So during the campaign, he's talking a lot of bombast and fear, 54-40 or fight, and manifest destiny is wildly popular among most voting Americans, although the election was somewhat close. So you could see some who are maybe criticizing it. And some of those critics are going to be concerned about the expansion of slavery, which we'll get to in a moment. But, Polk is, his supporters are all about manifest destiny expansion, 54-40 or fight, but privately is like, we need to work something out. I don't know if another war with England's a good idea. So what happens is this. The 49th parallel, right, became the boundary between the U.S. and Great Britain and Canada, remains so to this day, right, the longest unguarded border, right, the longest friendly border in the world, okay? So we see this boundary here, but Great Britain retained control of Vancouver Island, right? So this is still Canada here today. All right, so we see that. And this goes all the way, of course, to the Pacific Ocean. So we're fulfilling that manifest destiny, at least in the northwestern part. Notice Mexico still owns below this down here, right? So diplomatic negotiations here cause the U.S. to take control of Oregon. it's going to take war to conquer California and the rest of the American Southwest. Okay, so let me repeat that. Diplomatic negotiations allow the U.S. to acquire this territory with England. It's going to take war to conquer what's below it and fulfill that manifest destiny, I guess, completely. Okay, so let's get into that now with the time that I have remaining. So let's take a look at California. Now, initially, Polk wants to purchase California, New Mexico as well, and gain recognition of U.S. annexation of Texas for $25 million. Okay, a lot of money back in those days, of course, a lot of money now. What he did is he sent an emissary, and that emissary's name, not that you need to know it, but it was John M. Slidell, to Mexico City in 1845 to make this offer. So in 1845, Polk sends an emissary to Mexico City, capital of Mexico, and says, hey, we'll buy this from you for $25 million. But Mexico is going to reject this offer because what you have to understand, kids, is Polk is literally offering to buy about half of what Mexico was at the time. It would be like someone, asking to borrow the United States from, the Great Plains through California, like half of the continental United States. We'd probably say no. Okay. So, enter Texas. What do you mean, Texas? What? When you just talking about California? Yeah, Texas is a factor here too. So James Polk in California is the title of this slide, but notice the issue of Texas here is key to this as well. Okay. So Polk also wanted, so he's offered $25 million, right, to Mexico for California, also New Mexico, but he also wants the Rio Grande to be the Texas border. Now, this map here is pretty helpful. This is the Rio Grande, and you probably recognize most of this as what Texas looks like today, but not quite. You notice you got this long strip that goes up more north here. So this is the Rio Grande River, right? Polk believes that should be the border of Texas. The current recognized border of Texas by Mexico, when Texas had a revolt and defeated Santa Anna, okay, is in 1836, is here. So this is the border that Mexico recognizes. All of this is what Polk thinks they should recognize. In other words, this should all be Texas, not just this part here. Okay, so Polk is going to seek to take advantage of this boundary dispute here. And what he's going to do is he's going to send troops led by Zachary Taylor into the disputed region. And those troops are going to be about down in here, kind of across the border in this area here, close to the Gulf of Mexico. Now, Polk is basically hoping for a confrontation here, or at least seems as if Polk is trying to provoke hostilities with Mexico. Remember, in a democracy, you need the support of the people for war. People tend to support war when it looks like you're being attacked or there's a clear and present threat or danger, okay? But it seems as if Polk's provoking it here. His diary, we have his diary. His diary actually stated in these days that he was hoping for a confrontation. And Mexican troops did finally attack on April 25th, 1846, and 16 Americans will be killed. Now, remember, Mexicans had fired on Americans in the disputed territory, okay, east of the Rio Grande. This is the Rio Grande. This is the disputed territory. This is independent Texas, United States, right? This is where the shots were fired, somewhere in here, okay? Polk presented this to Congress, this attack, as an unprovoked attack. But there's some question as to it was unprovoked. As a matter of fact, a little known aspect of the history of Abraham Lincoln is Abraham Lincoln protested this. It's called his spot resolution speech. He wanted to know the spot in which shots were fired, because if U.S. troops had gone into disputed territory, one could argue that the attack had been provoked and that Mexico was perhaps justified somewhat in firing on Americans, and Lincoln actually protested the possibility of this war. Now, why is Lincoln doing that? Part of the issue is slavery. Southern states expand, slavery can expand. One consistent stance in Abraham Lincoln's political career, consistent, was he was always against the expansion of slavery. It's difficult to argue whether he was ever a die-hard immediate abolitionist. I think you would argue against that. But he was always against the expansion of it. So he protests this here, and he took some heat for that politically at the time. But the point is, there's some debate, like, should this be happening? Nevertheless, Congress declared war in May of 1846. Okay? All right. So the Mexican War occurs. This is the Mexican-American War of 1846 through 1848. Polk and his allies, of course, support the war, right? But there are concerns from his opponents. What are they concerned about? I got a little bit into this with describing why Lincoln opposed it. They're concerned about Polk's manipulation, weakening the congressional power to declare war, right? Remember, it is Congress who has the power to declare war. And it looks to opponents of this, that they're very concerned that Polk's manipulations are causing this war to be declared, and Congress is following suit, and then that could be too much power in the hands of the president. So there's some congressional power issues going on here, right? Constitutional power issues going on here. The expansion of slavery is, again, an issue, okay? If you bring in these territories into the Union, what states are going to be free? What states are going to be enslaved? And that'll become more of a clear issue in the next week or so as we address some of the compromises that came up with expansion and what states were free and what were slave. But that's an issue. And then the other issue is, this sure just seemed to be a war of conquest, right? Americans typically like to define their wars as wars for liberty, right? Wars for democracy. We don't like to define ourselves as wars of conquest. I mean, remember, the United States had rebelled against a great empire to establish a democratic republic. Now we seem to sure be acting like an empire, right? And taking over some territory against the will of at least some of the people there. Okay, so this conflict is going to last for a couple of years. Don't do a lot of military history in here, but I thought I'd throw some things down quickly, right? Some key people to mention: Zachary Taylor will capture Monterrey and Buena Vista. That's down here into, I guess this would be central Mexico. So you notice the United States goes into parts of Mexico. Like, they take this war to Mexico. All right. There are some who want to see the United States capture all of Mexico here, not just half of it. Okay. Stephen Kearny, he's up here. You can see him march in from Missouri with his troops and kind of go up into this region here, Southern California, I guess that would be, right? Okay. John C. Fremont, he's not on this map, but he'll be key right up here in the mid, like San Francisco in this area here. Like, he'll capture a lot of California. And Fremont's an interesting figure in history, because even though he's a major general for expansion, he'll be very anti-slavery, very anti-slavery. And then Winfield Scott will occupy Mexico City. So here's the capital of Mexico. And I don't know if a lot of people remember that when they learn about the history of America and the Mexican-American War, the fact that we really took the fight to Mexico, that we have Winfield Scott occupying the capital of Mexico City, right, in this conflict. Okay, so some results here, and I'm almost out of time, so I'll be shutting up soon. As always, I appreciate you guys listening to me. I hope you're able to. So some results of the Mexican War. About 13,000 Americans died. That's a brutal conflict. Now, a lot of that was due to disease, but of course it is due to battle as well, of course. I mean, if you think about it, it took us a while to reach number. It took us 20 years to reach numbers like that in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? And this is a 2-year conflict, 2 to 3 year conflict. It's kind of a training ground for several officers for the Civil War, including Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant. Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant will both serve in this conflict and serve well, get some distinction in it. Robert E. Lee will go on to lead Confederate forces, and Grant will go on to lead Union forces in the Civil War. So it's kind of a proving ground for men like that. And then, of course, many Mexicans will become resentful of the United States, and maybe some of that still exists. You know, sometimes I think Americans forget these days when they're complaining about, you know, illegal immigration or whatever, that I think sometimes they forget that we did take half of Mexico from them at one point, okay? I think they also forget about the valuable labor that most of those people contribute, but I digress on that point, okay? Let me just finish out here, a couple key points. I know my time is about up, okay? But what we end up with, and remember I post these guys, I know some of you try and copy it down, which I really appreciate, but these will be posted if you want to look at them later. So what we have here is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which is finalized in 1848. This is the treaty that ended the Mexican War. The Rio Grande became the border between Mexico and the United States, which is what Polk wanted. The United States received California and territory in the Southwest. This is a very generous treaty to the Americans, very generous. Vast amount of territory acquired. And the United States gave Mexico 18 million. So Mexico even loses out on how much money they could have gotten out of this. Remember, Polk offered 25 million. Polk offered 25 million, and they ended up with 18. And they ended up with 18. I just want to show you one more map, and then I've got some concluding comments. And then you do have homework tonight. Say about that briefly. Okay. So this is a great map. Really, this is a great map of expansion of the United States from the original 13 colonies, right? This is fantastic. Okay, nice find on Google, right? So you got the original 13 states, of course, here, but these will be territories that will be ceded by Britain with the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Most of that, of course, being Northwest Territory. Then we purchased Louisiana from the French in 1803, right? Texas annexation, Oregon Territory, Mexican cession with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And then there's some other purchases that occur along the way, right? Making our final contiguous 48 states. But once again, notice the expansive territory that really, guys, Mexico at one time was all of this. And down into this, a little bit more into the south here. It's once a huge country, right? I think sometimes we forget that. And once again, so obviously with expansion, there's some, resources and opportunities with land and all those things, but there were some concerns, right? And that is, what about slavery? Slavery is an issue every time the United States expands in this time period. What states are going to be free? What states are going to be enslaved? And that's a key issue because of representation in Congress and who seems to have more power in decision-making in Congress. Those who have slaves or those who don't. And that'll be a key issue going forward. Okay? All right. You do have a homework assignment tonight. I don't think it's too bad. Of course, maybe I always say that. I do want you to look at chapter 13. You have 3 questions. Okay, and I know you're eager to get out of here, but I want to just show you what it is and make you understand that you probably don't have to read the whole chapter here. Of course, you're always welcome to, but we're just pulling a few things out of this chapter. So you've got 3 questions. We'll put you in 3 groups tomorrow. Each group will present a question, okay? Just to get one of the ways in which I can get you talking in Zoom. How did the abolitionist movement impact the women's movement? Great question. Of the various approaches to the problem of slavery, which one do you find to be the most effective and why? There's a few different approaches there. And in what ways were antebellum feminists radical? In what ways were they traditional? Great question. Love that we're getting into some women's issues here. Now, antebellum, kids, if you don't know what that term is, remember that's pre-Civil War. If you look at these questions, they should guide you to the sections that you need to read in this chapter. You don't need to read every section in this chapter. Once again, you're welcome to, but these are the sections that I want to focus on. I want to pull some things out of this chapter. Okay? Any questions of me?
All right. Sure, I got some.
All right.
Not necessarily for the good of the order, though. Kind of specific stuff.
All right. If you don't have questions, guys, you can leave me, and I wish you a good day. If you do have questions, feel free to stay on and ask, or send me a message. Let's see, I'll stop my recording here.